She was just the maid, fired without warning and dragged to court by the billionaire she worked for. With no lawyer, no money, and no one to defend her, everyone believed she was guilty. But right before the verdict, his own son walked into the courtroom, faced the judge, and revealed a secret that changed everything. Before we continue with this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Oh, and don't forget to comment below where you're watching us from. We love to know that. Clara had been working at the Hale mansion for 6 years. Her main responsibility was taking care of Leo, the son of billionaire Richard Hale. From the day Leo was born, Clara was there. She changed his diapers, fed him, stayed awake all night when he had a fever, and comforted him when he cried. She was more than a nanny, she was the one who raised him. Leo never hesitated to call her Mommy Clara, a name he chose himself. Even though he understood that Clara was just the lady who works at home, to him she was something more. Every morning he would run into her arms. During meals, he asked her to sit with him. At bedtime, only Clara could tell the stories he liked. Their bond was strong and natural. Over the years, Clara became not only his caregiver, but also his emotional anchor, someone he trusted completely and felt safe with. Richard Hale, the powerful and often distant owner of the mansion, had always allowed this arrangement without much thought. He was a busy man, constantly traveling and focused on his business empire. In the beginning, he was grateful Clara could handle everything about Leo. He barely spent time with the boy himself. Clara's presence gave him peace of mind. Someone was there to manage the child while he focused on work. But as time went by, something began to shift. Richard started noticing things he hadn't paid attention to before. He saw how Leo clung to Clara, how he ignored the expensive toys Richard bought but treasured a drawing he made for her. The small acts of affection, the way Leo's eyes lit up around Clara, these things began to stand out to him. And for some reason, they didn't sit right anymore. At first, Richard thought he was just overthinking. Maybe it was normal for a child to love the person who cared for him every day. But the moments kept piling up. One afternoon, Richard found a picture Leo had drawn. It showed a house with stick figures. One was labeled me, the other Clara, and above them, in colorful crayon letters, it read, "I love you, Mummy Clara." There was no figure labeled Dad. Richard stared at that drawing longer than he expected. That night, he started paying more attention. He watched how Leo reached only for Clara when he scraped his knee, how he asked for her opinion even on little things, like what shirt to wear. Slowly, Richard's feelings began to shift from neutral to curious, and then to something deeper, an uneasiness he couldn't explain. The uneasiness grew. Richard wasn't the type to express emotions easily, but now he found himself standing in doorways, watching Clara and Leo interact. One day, he overheard Clara helping Leo with homework. The boy laughed freely, telling her a joke only they seemed to understand. Richard noticed the gentle way Clara responded to Leo's questions and how patient she was, even when he got something wrong. It wasn't just a professional relationship. It was more than that. It was personal. It was close, maybe too close. Richard began to feel like an outsider in his own home, like a stranger observing a family that didn't include him. That thought bothered him more than he expected. Clara wasn't family. She was staff. And yet, somehow, she had taken a role he hadn't realized he had neglected. Richard tried to reason with himself. Clara was doing her job, nothing more. Of course, she and Leo were close. She had been raising him since birth. But even as he tried to stay logical, he couldn't ignore the tension growing inside him. It wasn't jealousy, he told himself. It was about boundaries, about roles, about making sure things didn't go too far. He started giving Clara more instructions. He reminded her that she was an employee. He asked her to send daily reports about Leo's routines. He called for meetings discussing Leo's upbringing in a more formal tone. Clara noticed the change. She didn't argue, but her smile became smaller, more restrained. She spent less time in the living room and more time in Leo's room. Leo noticed too. He asked Clara why she looked tired. She just hugged him and said everything was fine. Still, Richard couldn't shake the feeling. He began rewatching footage from the mansion's security cameras. At first, he told himself it was for safety, but in truth, he was looking for something to explain why this situation disturbed him so much. He watched Clara reading stories to Leo, brushing his hair, laughing when he made silly faces. It all looked so natural, so real. He couldn't find anything inappropriate, but that didn't calm him. If anything, it made things worse. The warmth between them, the unspoken understanding. It felt like a relationship he should have had with his own son, but never did. And now he didn't know how to fix it, or if he even could. The connection between Clara and Leo had grown too strong, and Richard wasn't sure where he fit anymore. Eventually, Richard's attitude shifted from silent observation to subtle interference. He began spending more time at home, often showing up unexpectedly. He tried to play with Leo, asked about his day, made small talk with Clara, but the boy remained loyal to his routine. He still reached for Clara's hand, still asked her to read bedtime stories. One night, Leo was crying after a nightmare, and Richard rushed to comfort him, but Leo only calmed down when Clara arrived. Richard stood there watching as the boy clung to her neck, whispering, "Don't leave me, Mummy Clara." That moment hit Richard hard. He left the room without a word. Alone in his office, he began to realize what truly bothered him. Clara had become something he hadn't been, a constant. Someone Leo counted on, and now that bond felt like a challenge, a threat. Though Clara had done nothing wrong, Richard saw her through new eyes. No longer just as a housekeeper, but as someone who had taken a place he thought belonged only to him. Without any warning, Clara was fired from her job. One morning, she arrived at the mansion like usual, expecting to help Leo get ready for the day. Instead, she was met at the door by two security guards who handed her an envelope and told her she no longer worked there. She wasn't allowed to enter the house. When she asked what was going on, they said it was a decision from Mr. Hale and that they had no other information. Clara stood there confused and heartbroken. She didn't get a chance to say goodbye to Leo. He didn't even know she was leaving. She waited outside for a few minutes, hoping someone would explain or call her back in, but no one came. The door stayed closed. Eventually, she walked away, carrying her purse and the envelope that only said her contract was terminated immediately, with no further details or reasons given. 2 days later, Clara was at home when she heard loud knocking at her apartment door. It was the police. They handed her an official court notice. Richard Hale was accusing her of trying to kidnap Leo. According to the document, a suitcase filled with Leo's clothes had been found hidden behind her bedroom closet at the mansion. Along with that, the report mentioned several goodbye letters, supposedly written by Clara, and even copies of fake documents, passports and ID papers with both her name and Leo's. Clara couldn't believe what she was reading. She stood in her kitchen with her hands shaking. None of it made sense. She had never packed any suitcase, she had never written any goodbye letter, and she certainly had never made fake documents. But the accusations were written clearly, and they came from Richard Hale himself, a powerful man who had the money and influence to make people believe whatever he said. Before Clara could process what was happening, the story had already reached the news. Reporters stood outside her building. Neighbors stared as they saw her picture on TV. Headlines said things like, "Housemaid caught planning escape with billionaire's child," and attempted kidnapping inside Hale Mansion. Clara tried to explain to journalists that none of it was true, but no one wanted to hear her side. They only cared about what Richard said. After all, he was famous and rich. She was just a maid. Her voice didn't matter. She called a few people she knew asking for help, but most of them backed away, afraid of getting involved. The little money she had wasn't enough to hire a good lawyer. And without a lawyer, it was almost impossible to prove anything. Clara spent the next few nights crying, afraid, and confused. She didn't even know how to start defending herself against something she didn't do. Clara was later called to appear in court for a preliminary hearing. It was her first time inside a courtroom. The walls felt cold, and the people looked serious. She sat alone at a small table while a judge read through the documents. Richard Hale was not there in person, but his lawyers were. They presented the suitcase, the letters, and the documents as evidence. Clara tried to speak. She told the judge she had never seen those items before. She said she loved Leo like a son and would never hurt him or take him away. But her words didn't seem to matter. The judge listened, but his expression didn't change. He kept looking at the documents the lawyers had brought. There were no cameras in the courtroom, no media coverage of what Clara said. Everything about the hearing felt one-sided. She could feel how little power she had in that room. After a few minutes of silence, the judge finally made his decision. He said the evidence presented was serious enough to be considered a possible crime. Even though it wasn't a trial yet, he wanted to take precautions. He ordered Clara to stay away from the Hale mansion and from Leo. It was called a restraining order. That meant Clara couldn't call, visit, or even try to contact Leo in any way. If she did, she could be arrested. Clara was shocked. The boy she had raised for 6 years, the boy who called her Mommy Clara, was now legally off-limits to her. She couldn't even explain to him what was happening. She didn't get to hug him or tell him goodbye. It felt like she had lost everything all at once. Her job, her home, her reputation, and now the child she loved most. Clara left the courtroom feeling defeated. Outside, more reporters waited with microphones, cameras, and questions she couldn't answer. Her name had become a headline, but no one knew who she really was or what she had actually done, which was nothing. She returned to her small apartment and sat on the floor, staring at the wall. Her phone kept buzzing with notifications and messages from unknown numbers. Some people were sending insults, calling her names. Others sent threats. Clara didn't know how her life had fallen apart so fast. Everything felt like a nightmare. She tried to think of who might have framed her or planted the evidence, but she had no answers. The people she used to work with had stopped replying to her messages. It was like she had become invisible. The worst part wasn't the lies. It was knowing that Leo was probably scared or confused, and she couldn't even be there to protect him. Clara was finally allowed to return to the Hale mansion, but only to collect her personal belongings. The permission came with strict rules. She had to be escorted by 2 security guards at all times, and was not allowed to enter any room without one of them watching her. She felt nervous as she approached the large gate. The place that had once felt like her second home now seemed cold and distant. The guards didn't speak much. One of them opened the door for her, while the other listed what areas she was allowed to enter. Clara quietly nodded, holding back tears. She didn't want to cry in front of them. The plan was simple: go to her old room, pack her things, and leave as fast as possible. She wasn't expecting to see anyone, especially not Leo. She thought they would keep him away while she was there, but fate had a different plan. As she walked through the hallway toward the servants' wing, she heard a familiar voice. "Clara!" It was Leo. He was running toward her, barefoot and crying. He had somehow gotten past the nanny or whoever was watching him. Before the guards could stop him, Leo threw himself into Clara's arms. She held him tightly, trying to stay calm, but her heart was breaking. "Why did you leave me? Why didn't you say goodbye?" he asked, sobbing. Clara stroked his hair and whispered that everything would be okay, even though she wasn't sure of anything anymore. The guards didn't separate them right away. Maybe they felt a bit of sympathy, or maybe they were just surprised. For a few seconds, it was just Clara and Leo, reunited after days of pain and confusion. Clara tried to focus on comforting him, but her eyes suddenly locked on something that made her stop breathing for a moment. There, on Leo's right arm, just under his short sleeve, was a birthmark. It wasn't just any birthmark. It had a curved shape with small dark spots inside it, an unusual pattern that Clara had seen before. Her own right arm had the exact same mark in the same shape and size, but more importantly, she had seen this mark once on a newborn. 6 years ago, after a complicated and painful labor, Clara had given birth to a baby boy. The doctors had told her the child died shortly after birth due to complications. She never saw him again, only got a brief glimpse when he was taken away. But in that brief moment, she remembered the birthmark. She remembered it clearly because it matched hers exactly, and the nurse even commented on how rare it was. Seeing it now on Leo's arm made her entire body freeze. Clara pulled back slightly and looked again, just to be sure. She wasn't imagining it. The mark was there. She reached for her own arm, pulling up her sleeve, and compared the two. They were identical. Her mind started racing. This couldn't be a coincidence. That shape, those small dark spots. This was not a common birthmark. It was too specific. Clara felt dizzy. She let go of Leo for a second and stared at him. All the years she spent with him suddenly took on a new meaning. The bond they had, the way he always felt like her own child, the way he had called her Mommy Clara since he was a toddler, it all made sense now. Or at least it started to. She didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the possibility hit her hard. Could Leo actually be her son? She remembered the hospital, the panic, the confusion during childbirth. She was weak, in pain, and alone. The staff had moved quickly, and everything had happened in a blur. After they told her the baby didn't survive, no one gave her answers. She was never allowed to hold him or see the body. She was only given papers to sign and sent home days later with a hollow feeling. For years, Clara had lived with the grief of losing her child. Now, looking at Leo, a boy she had raised since birth without knowing the truth, she wondered if someone had lied to her, if her baby had been taken. And if Leo, the boy she loved and cared for all these years, was actually the same child she had mourned. Her stomach turned at the thought. She felt betrayed, confused, and scared. But mostly, she felt something stronger, a desperate need to know the truth. Leo looked up at her, still crying but calmer now. "I missed you," he said softly. Clara tried to smile, but her face didn't move. Her eyes were fixed on the mark. She couldn't ignore it. The guards finally stepped forward and reminded her that she was only there to collect her things. One of them tried to take Leo's hand and lead him away, but he resisted. Clara didn't argue. She didn't want to cause a scene, not yet. She needed to think. She needed answers. But one thing was clear. Her life had just changed again, in a way she never expected. That small mark on Leo's arm had opened a door to a truth far more painful and powerful than any accusation or false story in the media. Clara turned away slowly, her thoughts spinning. This wasn't just about losing her job anymore. It was about something much bigger. As the guards led her back to her room, Clara barely noticed what she was packing. Her hands moved automatically, folding clothes and placing them in a bag. But her mind was somewhere else. She kept going back to that birthmark. She remembered the medical records, the nurse's comment, the forms she was made to sign. Everything now felt suspicious. Why hadn't she fought harder to see her baby's body? Why did the hospital handle everything so quickly? Could Richard Hale have somehow been involved? Had someone sold her child? It sounded crazy, but so did everything else happening in her life. One thing she knew for sure, she couldn't ignore what she had seen. Leo's birthmark wasn't just a strange coincidence. It was a sign. Clara zipped her bag, took a deep breath, and walked out of the mansion with one thought in her mind. She had to uncover the truth. That mark changed everything. That night, Clara sat on the floor of her small apartment, surrounded by old boxes she had kept hidden for years. She had not opened them in a long time. Dust covered the top, and the tape holding them closed had dried and cracked. Inside were things she had stored away after the worst day of her life, the day she was told her newborn son had died. With trembling hands, she pulled out folders, envelopes, and loose papers. Most were hospital records, lab results, and outdated forms. She dug deeper until she found a thin manila folder labeled with the name she had planned to give her baby. Inside, she found the birth records and a single page titled Neonatal Assessment. Her eyes scanned the paper quickly. Then she stopped. One line read, "Pigmented birthmark on right forearm, crescent-shaped with scattered dark spots." Her heart started beating faster. It was the exact same description as Leo's birthmark. Clara read that line over and over again. The words didn't change. That specific shape, those small, dark spots, it was too rare, too exact to be a coincidence. She grabbed another piece of paper, this one with the official birth date. Her eyes widened. It matched Leo's birthday exactly. Same day, same year. She double-checked just to be sure. The hospital name matched too. Clara leaned back and stared at the papers in her lap. For years, she had lived with the pain of losing her baby. But something had always bothered her. The hospital had moved quickly, too quickly. After her emergency delivery, they told her the baby didn't survive. She had barely heard him cry. They never let her see him. A nurse said it was better that way. Clara had been tired, confused, and heartbroken. She had signed whatever papers they gave her, then went home empty-handed. But deep down, she had never fully accepted it. She had always carried a quiet doubt. No death certificate had ever been mailed. No burial information was provided. When she called the hospital later, they only said the records were private. Eventually, people told her to let go and move on. So she did, at least on the outside, but inside, the questions stayed. Now, with the birthmark, the matching date, and the silence from the past, Clara began to see the truth. Leo wasn't just any child. He was her son, her baby, the one they told her had died. And somehow, Richard Hale had ended up with him. Clara thought back to everything. The way Leo clung to her, how natural their connection had always felt, how he called her Mommy Clara without anyone teaching him. It all made sense now. The connection was real because it came from something real. Blood, history, and the bond between a mother and her child. Clara felt a mix of emotions crashing over her. Anger, confusion, sadness, and a growing determination. She looked around her small apartment, suddenly realizing how much had been stolen from her. For 6 years, someone else had raised her child. Someone else had claimed him, named him, and lied about who he really was. Richard Hale had all the money and power to hide things, to cover up the truth, and now it made sense why he had turned on her so suddenly. Maybe he had started to notice the bond between her and Leo. Maybe he feared the truth would come out. Clara remembered how his behavior changed over time, how he went from ignoring her to watching her closely, then suddenly accusing her of a crime she didn't commit. Now she understood why. He had something to hide. He knew Leo wasn't his, and he was desperate to keep the truth buried. Clara stood up and began pacing the room. She had to be careful. She couldn't just go back to the mansion and demand her son. Richard had already painted her as a criminal. He had money, lawyers, and media connections. She had none of that. But now she had something more important. The truth. And she had proof. The birth records, the birthmark description, and Leo's birthday all matched. She needed help, legal support, someone who could fight for her. But more than anything, she needed to protect Leo. He was living in a house full of lies. He didn't know who he really was. Clara didn't know what Richard had told him or what else he was capable of. She sat down again and carefully organized the papers. She placed them in a new folder and wrote one word on the cover: proof. This time, she wasn't going to be silent. She stared out the window, the city lights glowing in the distance. Everything she had believed for years had just been turned upside down. But at the same time, everything finally made sense. Clara had lost her son once, but now she had a chance to get him back. She thought about the day she held Leo as a baby, the night she stayed up with him, the way he always ran to her first. Those weren't just memories of a nanny caring for a child. They were moments between a mother and her son. Clara's hands stopped shaking. Her thoughts became clearer. She wasn't crazy. She wasn't making this up. Her instincts had been right all along, and now she had more than instinct. She had facts. The man who fired her, the one who now accused her of a crime, had been raising her child without her knowledge. That fact changed everything. As she placed the folder in a safe spot and locked it inside a drawer, Clara felt something she hadn't felt in days. Hope. This wasn't just about justice. It was about truth. It was about love. She had been cast aside, framed, and silenced. But now she had the most powerful reason in the world to fight back. Her son was alive. Leo wasn't just the boy she had cared for. He was hers, the one she had carried for 9 months, the one she had cried for when she thought he was gone. And now she knew the truth. He had never been gone. He had been with her all along, raised by the man who betrayed her. Clara knew that the road ahead would be hard, but she wasn't afraid anymore. She looked at the papers one last time and whispered, "I'm coming for you." Her son was alive, and she was going to bring him home. Clara spent the next morning calling hospitals, checking old contacts, and searching online for any names she could remember from the day she gave birth. One name stood out: Luciana, a nurse who had briefly comforted her during her labor. Clara remembered her soft voice and kind eyes, the only person who had shown any sympathy that night. After hours of searching, Clara found a phone number listed under the same name, now retired and living in a nearby town. Without thinking twice, Clara grabbed her bag and left the apartment. The bus ride took over an hour, but she didn't care. Her mind raced the whole way. She rehearsed what she would say, how she would convince the woman to talk. When she finally arrived, she stood in front of an old apartment building, heart pounding. After climbing 2 flights of stairs, she knocked on the door and waited, hoping that Luciana would even remember her. The door opened slowly, revealing a woman in her 60s with short grey hair and a tired expression. At first, Luciana didn't recognize Clara. But as soon as Clara said her name and explained who she was, something changed in the woman's eyes. Luciana looked nervous, almost afraid. She invited Clara in and offered her a seat, glancing out the window before closing the curtains. Clara didn't waste time. She explained everything: the birthmark, Leo, the matching documents, and her suspicion that her son had been taken from her. Luciana listened silently, her hands folded in her lap. When Clara asked if anything unusual happened that night at the hospital, the nurse hesitated. For a moment, it looked like she was going to deny everything, but then she sighed and leaned back in her chair. "There was something," she said quietly, "something that never made sense. I remember it clearly. I've never forgotten that night. It was delivered by someone from the outside, a legal document with special clearance. None of the nurses were allowed to ask questions or access the digital file after that. Security guards were stationed near the infant ward, and the baby was gone before sunrise. Luciana said she had tried to understand what was happening, but when she asked questions, she was warned to stay quiet. She never saw that child again." Clara asked if she remembered the name linked to the adoption. Luciana nodded slowly and said, 'It was a man named Richard Hale.' Clara froze. Her eyes filled with tears. The same man who had employed her, accused her and stolen everything from her, he was the one who had taken her child. Clara couldn't stop shaking. Her breathing became heavy and tears streamed down her face. She felt sick, betrayed, and filled with rage. Richard Hale had taken her baby, lied about it, and then hired her to raise him without letting her know the truth. He let her feed him, love him, care for him, all while pretending she was just the help. Clara stood up, pacing around the room, trying to stay calm. She asked Luciana if she would be willing to testify or give a statement, but the woman looked down. "I'm scared," she said. "That man has power, more than you know. He could ruin my life." Clara understood, but it broke her heart. She thanked Luciana for her honesty and left with a heavy weight on her shoulders. She now had the confirmation she needed, but she also realized how big the fight ahead would be. She was on her own. Again. On the way home, Clara kept going over everything in her head. The timeline, the night of the birth, the secrecy in the hospital and Richard's sudden control over the baby. It all made sense now. Richard had used his money and influence to steal her child and make it look legal. Then he erased any trace of her connection to Leo. Clara couldn't believe she had worked in his house for 6 years without knowing the truth. She had trusted him, served him, and taken care of his household. And all that time, he had been hiding the most painful truth from her. Now she wasn't just angry. She was determined. She had to find proof. Not just what Luciana said, but something official, something that would stand up in court, because words wouldn't be enough. Richard could deny everything unless she had evidence strong enough to expose him. Back at home, Clara sat at her kitchen table with a notebook. She wrote down everything she had learned, step by step. She made a list of people to contact, records to request, and places to check. She didn't know where this path would lead, but she knew she had to follow it. Her son had been taken from her. Her rights had been stolen. And now, the man behind it all was trying to bury her with lies. Clara wiped her face and looked at the folder of documents again. The fight was far from over. Richard Hale had money, lawyers, and connections. But Clara had something stronger now, a reason that couldn't be bought or silenced. She was a mother, and her son had been taken. That truth was more powerful than anything Richard owned. Even if she was completely alone in this, she wasn't backing down, not anymore. While going through old boxes in her apartment didn't bring Clara much hope, she knew there had to be more. Her instincts told her that the real answers were still hidden inside the place she once called home, the Hale mansion. Clara knew it was risky, but during her last visit there to collect her things, she had noticed a locked door near the basement that Richard never allowed staff to enter. That door led to a small storage room filled with old office supplies, files, and forgotten records. On a late afternoon, with the help of a former co-worker who still worked at the mansion, Clara was able to get access. She stepped inside and began looking through everything. After nearly an hour of searching through shelves and dusty boxes, she found a dark green binder with cracked edges. Inside were lists of names. Contractors, private nurses, legal contacts. Then she found something that made her freeze in place. There was a document tucked between loose sheets of paper. It looked like a birth certificate, but parts of it had been erased or covered with whiteout. The child's name wasn't visible. The space for the mother's name was blank, but the birth date was there, and it matched Leo's. The most alarming part was the signature at the bottom. It belonged to a retired judge. Clara recognized the name because it was on one of the hospital forms she had found earlier. She took a picture of the document with her phone, heart pounding in her chest. This was it. Proof that something had been hidden. That birth certificate was never supposed to be seen. It wasn't legal. It had been altered. Clara now had more than suspicions. She had a link connecting the hospital, the adoption, and someone in the legal system who helped Richard carry out the lie. It was all starting to connect. Clara left the mansion quickly, her hands sweating as she gripped her phone. She needed something stronger than papers now. She needed science, something no one could deny. She remembered Leo's old toothbrush, one she had packed by accident when she collected her things. It was still in the side pocket of her bag, untouched. That night, she called her old friend Paula, who worked in a small laboratory that did paternity and DNA testing. Clara didn't give all the details, just said it was urgent and very personal. Paula agreed to help. The next morning, Clara dropped off the toothbrush, along with a swab of her own saliva. Paula said the results would take 48 hours. Those 2 days felt longer than anything Clara had ever experienced. She could barely eat. She couldn't sleep. She kept checking her phone every hour. When the message finally came through, Clara held her breath before opening the file. The PDF loaded slowly, but the answer was clear. The DNA comparison showed a 99.999% match. Clara was Leo's biological mother. No question, no doubt. Her legs gave out, and she sat on the floor, staring at the screen, crying. For years, she had carried pain, confusion, and unanswered questions. Now she had the truth. The paper didn't lie. She wasn't crazy, and she hadn't imagined the connection she felt with Leo. It was real. She had carried him in her womb. She had given birth to him, and now she had evidence. But with the truth came a difficult decision. Clara knew that exposing everything could lead to a long, ugly legal battle. Richard was powerful. He could try to silence her again. She could be dragged through the media once more, but staying quiet meant accepting the lie. It meant letting Leo live without knowing where he truly came from. Clara spent the night pacing her apartment, weighing her choices. She thought about Leo, his smile, his hugs, the way he always ran to her when he was scared or sad. She knew she couldn't let someone like Richard continue controlling the boy's future. She didn't want revenge. She didn't want money. She only wanted the truth to come out and for her son to be safe. The safest place for him wasn't inside that mansion. It was with her. Clara had always been his mother, even if the world didn't see it. She had missed his first birthday, his first words, and his first steps because someone had stolen that life from her. But she could be there now, and she could fight for what was right. Clara knew it wouldn't be easy, but her love for Leo was stronger than her fear. She had stayed silent too long. Now she was ready to speak. She called Paula the next morning and asked for an official printed version of the results. She placed the DNA document in a new folder, along with the photo of the altered birth certificate and a copy of the hospital report with the matching birthmark description. Clara took a deep breath as she stared at the collection of proof on her table. It wasn't just a pile of papers. It was her story, her truth. She made an appointment with the courthouse requesting a new hearing. The clerk said it would be reviewed in the coming days. Clara didn't hesitate. She had no more doubt. For years, she had served the man who had caused her greatest loss. He had tried to destroy her with lies, but now the truth was on her side, and she would use it. She wasn't just trying to get back at him, she was trying to get back her son. 2 days later, Clara stood on the courthouse steps, holding the folder close to her chest. She looked up at the building, took a deep breath, and walked inside. She knew it would be a long process. There would be hearings, questions, and battles. Richard would probably try everything to make her look like a liar. But it didn't matter anymore. She had the proof. She had the strength. And most importantly, she had the truth on her side. This time, she wouldn't be pushed around or silenced. She walked through the security check and into the hallway. Her name was called. Clara stepped forward with her documents in hand. She was done hiding, done being afraid. She was ready to face Richard in court, to tell the whole truth, and to fight for the one thing that mattered more than anything else: her son. The moment had come. Clara chose to let the truth appear. Clara sat in the courtroom with her hands on her lap, her eyes fixed on the floor. She had barely slept the night before. The weight of everything pressed down on her shoulders, accused of a crime she didn't commit, abandoned by the people who once trusted her, and about to face a judge with no lawyer by her side. She had filed the DNA evidence, but the legal system had moved fast. This hearing wasn't about uncovering the truth. It was about deciding if she would be punished. The courtroom was half full. On one side sat Richard Hale's legal team, dressed in expensive suits, looking calm and confident. On the other, Clara sat alone. No reporters this time, no cameras. Just cold silence and the sound of papers being shuffled as the judge walked in. Clara looked up briefly and then lowered her eyes again. She was ready for the worst, even if her heart wasn't. The judge opened a file and began speaking. His voice was firm, but not unkind. He listed the accusations: attempted kidnapping, forged documents, violation of the restraining order. Clara barely heard the words. Her thoughts were somewhere else. She wondered what Leo was doing. Was he at school? Did he miss her? Did he believe the lies? She had no way of knowing. Her request to present new evidence had been ignored. They said it was too late. The envelope with the DNA test and hospital documents sat unopened in the court records office. Richard's lawyers had made sure of that. As the judge continued reading, Clara tried to stay still, but her hands trembled. She felt the tears coming, but blinked them away. She didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. She told herself, just get through this. Whatever happens, don't lose yourself. Don't lose hope. Clara braced herself. That's when the courtroom doors opened suddenly. Everyone turned their heads. A small figure walked in. It was Leo. He looked nervous, but determined. His shoes made soft noises on the floor as he walked straight toward the judge. A few people gasped. Richard stood up, his face turning red. One of the guards stepped forward to stop the boy, but the judge raised his hand. Let him speak, the judge said calmly. Leo stopped in front of the bench and held out an envelope. This is important, he said. She's my mum. The room went silent. You could hear people breathing. Clara sat frozen, her mouth slightly open, tears already building in her eyes. Leo's voice trembled slightly, but he didn't stop. I found this paper. It says she's my real mum, and she has the same mark as me. The exact same. Carefully, he opened it and pulled out the DNA test. He looked it over, his expression unreadable. The courtroom remained silent. Richard's lawyers whispered to each other, clearly caught off guard. Richard looked furious, but he said nothing. Clara wiped her tears and watched her son. Leo didn't move. He stood tall in front of strangers, in front of a man who raised him on lies, just to tell the truth. Clara's hands covered her mouth. She had dreamed of this moment, but never imagined it would actually happen. Her son defending her, standing up in court, speaking louder than any adult ever had. This wasn't part of any plan. No one told Leo to come. He chose to. And in that moment, nothing else mattered. Not the lawyers, not the lies, not the fear. Just a boy who knew something was wrong and tried to fix it. The judge asked Leo to return to his seat. Clara reached out and held his hand as he walked over. Neither of them said a word, but they didn't have to have. The bond between them was clear now to everyone. The judge took a deep breath and looked at the courtroom. This changes things, he said. He turned to Richard's lawyers. I will review this evidence properly. For now, this hearing is paused. Richard looked like he was about to explode, but he didn't speak. The judge then looked at Clara. Thank you for staying calm through all of this. Clara nodded, still holding back tears. Leo sat beside her and leaned on her arm. She wrapped both arms around him, holding him close. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel alone. She didn't feel helpless. Her son had found her truth, and he had delivered it to the world. The judge stood up and left the courtroom. People slowly began to whisper and move. Clara stayed still, holding Leo in her arms. She didn't care about what the media would say. She didn't care about Richard's angry face or the expensive suits around her. For the first time, they weren't looking at her like a criminal. They were looking at a mother and her child. And they finally saw what was real. Leo turned to her and said, "I knew you were my mom. I always knew." Clara couldn't speak. She kissed his forehead and nodded, tears falling freely now. All the pain, the silence, the doubt, it had all led to this moment. One child, one voice, one truth. And now that truth was out, and nothing could stop it anymore. For the first time in 6 years, Clara felt seen. And she knew. This was just the beginning. Richard sat at the defense table, arms crossed, looking straight ahead as the judge reviewed the newly accepted documents. The courtroom was full again, this time with reporters, observers, and people who had followed every part of the case since it first appeared in the news. Clara sat quietly across from him, her hands calm in her lap, Leo beside her. The DNA test, the altered birth certificate, and the birthmark description had all been accepted as evidence. The judge placed the documents down and asked Richard if he had anything to say about the materials submitted. Richard adjusted his tie, cleared his throat, and said they were fake. He denied everything. He claimed the documents were forged, that Clara was manipulating the court, and that the child was legally his. But the judge was not convinced. He ordered an official investigation into the adoption records, hospital files, and court documents from 6 years earlier. Over the next week, investigators entered the Hale mansion and removed boxes of files and digital records. The findings shocked even the court officials. Everything Clara had said matched what they found. There were private payments made to hospital staff, sealed documents with gaps in data, and most importantly, a hidden file showing Leo's original birth certificate, with Clara's name listed as mother. It had been marked void by order of a retired judge, the same one who had signed the altered version. The DNA test confirmed the truth. Leo was Clara's biological son. There was no denying it anymore. As the investigation continued, someone inside the court leaked the case to the press. Within hours, the story went viral. Headlines read, "Billionaire accused of stealing child," "The nanny who was the real mother," and "Truth behind the Hale adoption." News channels ran the story day and night. Everyone had something to say. Across the country, people argued. Some believed Clara completely, calling her a victim of power and corruption. Others defended Richard, saying it was too late to change things, that Leo had lived with him all his life. Social media exploded with opinions, hashtags, and viral videos. Journalists waited outside Clara's apartment and the courthouse, hoping for comments. Clara stayed quiet through it all. She didn't want to feed the noise. She didn't care about interviews or fame. She only wanted one thing, to be with her son without more pain. When the court called her to testify again, people expected a dramatic moment. They expected her to demand punishment, to ask the judge to sentence Richard for all he had done. But Clara surprised everyone. She stood before the judge, took a deep breath, and said, "I don't want him to go to jail. I forgive him. I just want my son. That's all I ever wanted." Even the judge looked surprised. He leaned forward slightly and asked, "You don't want charges pressed?" Clara shook her head. "No, Your Honor. He took something from me, yes, but putting him in prison won't give me back the years I lost. It won't fix what happened. I just want to raise my son in peace." Some people in the courtroom gasped. Others began whispering. Richard looked down, clearly uncomfortable. Clara's voice didn't shake. Her words were simple and clear. She wasn't looking for revenge. She was looking for healing. The judge sat back in his chair and nodded slowly. It was clear that her decision had changed the mood in the room. People began to look at her differently, not as a victim, not as someone in a fight, but as a mother who had suffered quietly and still chose peace over anger. The judge asked Leo if he wanted to speak. The boy stood holding Clara's hand. "I want to live with her," he said. "She's my mom." His voice was quiet but firm. The judge nodded and said he would take everything into account. He announced that given the evidence and Clara's testimony, the court would grant her full custody during the remainder of the investigation. Richard remained seated, silent. For once, his money and power couldn't stop the truth. The reporters in the back scribbled every word. Clara, now holding Leo in her arms, didn't smile or celebrate. She just closed her eyes for a moment and let out a slow breath. The courtroom wasn't a battlefield anymore. It was a place where her truth had finally been heard. And even more than that, it was a place where Leo had been allowed to choose where he belonged. As the hearing ended and people stood to leave, something changed in the way the crowd looked at Clara. They didn't see a criminal or an ex-employee or a woman trying to get attention. They saw a mother, a woman who had been through pain, lies, and silence, and still chose not to destroy the person who hurt her. Her decision to forgive didn't make her weak. It made her stronger. The judge thanked her again and said the final ruling would be made soon, but for now she was free to take her son home. Clara stood and walked out of the courtroom with Leo holding her hand tightly. Reporters shouted her name, cameras flashed, and questions filled the air. But she didn't stop. She didn't owe anyone a story. Her story had already been told where it mattered most, in the courtroom and in the eyes of the child who now called her mom without fear. The courtroom was quiet as the judge entered and took his seat for the final hearing. Everyone knew that today would be different. It was the day when the court would give its final decision on Leo's custody and the truth behind everything that had happened. Clara sat with her hands on her knees, waiting. She had come a long way, through accusations, investigations, and emotional pain. But she was still here. Next to her, Leo sat calmly, holding her hand. The judge opened the folder in front of him and began to speak. His words were clear and firm. After reviewing all evidence, including the DNA results, medical documents, and testimonies, the court officially recognized Clara as the biological mother of Leo. The room stayed silent as the judge declared the immediate transfer of custody. Clara closed her eyes, letting the words sink in. It was real now. No more waiting, no more fighting. Her son was finally hers again. Richard, who had remained silent through most of the hearing, stood up and asked to speak. He tried to explain himself. He said he had adopted Leo in what he believed was a legal emergency adoption. He claimed that he had no knowledge of the child's real mother, that he only wanted to give a good life to a child who had no one. His tone was calm, almost rehearsed, but there was something missing, something that didn't match the documents the court had already seen. The judge looked at him with a neutral expression, but didn't interrupt. When Richard finished speaking, the court clerk brought forward the adoption records and pointed out the inconsistencies. The birth certificate had been edited. The retired judge's signature had been used to hide Clara's name. The hospital records had been sealed without protocol. Richard had known more than he admitted, and now the evidence proved it. Clara listened to Richard without interrupting. Her face didn't show anger, just sadness. When the judge asked if she wanted to press charges for the illegal adoption, forgery, or emotional damage, Clara shook her head. "No," she said quietly. "I don't want to take this further. He also loved my son. I believe that. But he tried to erase me, to hide the truth from both of us. That's what hurts the most." The room fell into another silence. The judge paused for a moment and then nodded. "You are choosing forgiveness," in a situation that gave you every reason to seek justice through punishment. That says a lot about your character. Clara looked at Leo, who smiled up at her. That was enough. She didn't need to destroy Richard to feel whole again. She had already won back the only thing that mattered: her son, her truth, her peace. The judge began closing the case. He thanked everyone involved in the investigation and made special note of Clara's strength and honesty throughout the entire process. He said she didn't just fight to get her son back, she showed what it means to fight without hate. This court sees many cases filled with bitterness, the judge said, but today we saw something rare: justice served with compassion. Clara didn't speak. She just nodded respectfully. Her emotions were too heavy to put into words. Leo leaned against her arm, and she held him closer. Richard sat quietly, no longer trying to explain himself. For the first time, he seemed to understand that this wasn't about winning or losing. It was about a child who deserved to know the truth, and that truth had finally come out. Clara stood up slowly as the judge announced the session closed. It was over. Not just the trial, but the nightmare she had lived through. Reporters waited outside the building, cameras flashing, microphones pointed in every direction. People whispered, pointed, and tried to get reactions. Clara didn't stop. She didn't smile for the cameras or answer questions. She didn't need to explain herself to the world anymore. The people who mattered already knew the truth. With Leo's hand firmly in hers, she walked past the noise without looking back. Her steps were steady, not rushed. She didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Her silence said everything. For so long, others had spoken for her, judged her, and tried to control her story, but now she had taken it back. Clara's face was calm, her eyes focused straight ahead. Leo walked beside her, no longer confused or scared. For the first time in his life, he knew where he belonged. And Clara knew she had done what she came to do, not to win a case, but to bring her son home. As they reached the sidewalk and moved away from the crowd, Clara squeezed Leo's hand. He looked up at her and smiled. "Are we going home now?" he asked. She nodded. "Yes, we're going home." There were no cheers, no celebration music, no big closing moment, just the sound of two people walking side by side, beginning again. Clara didn't turn to look back at the courthouse or at Richard or at the media still trying to catch one last photo. That part of her life was done. From this point on, everything was about the future, about giving Leo the childhood he deserved and rebuilding the years they had lost. It wouldn't be easy. Nothing had been, but now they would face life together, as they were always meant to. A mother and her son, finally walking in the same direction, with nothing left to hide. As Clara stepped out of the courthouse, she was immediately surrounded by flashing cameras, microphones, and reporters shouting her name. Dozens of questions flew at her all at once. Are you going to sue Richard Hale? Do you want more justice? How does it feel to win against a billionaire? Clara stopped walking for a moment. She looked at the sea of faces in front of her, many of whom had judged her before they ever knew her story. Then, with Leo standing quietly beside her, holding her hand, she gave a simple answer. "I already got justice," she said. "The justice system gave me back what was mine." Her voice was steady. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need to say anything else. The reporters kept trying to get more from her, but she turned and continued walking, leaving behind the cameras, the noise, and the people who once saw her as nothing more than a headline. Months passed, and the world slowly moved on. The story that had once dominated the news was now just an old article buried online. Clara no longer lived in the shadow of someone else's power. She and Leo had moved into a small, quiet apartment in a modest neighborhood. The place wasn't fancy, but it was theirs. The walls were light blue, and the kitchen always smelled like something baking. Leo had his own room, painted with drawings they made together. Clara had found a job that made her feel proud, not cleaning for others, but helping people who had gone through pain like hers. She worked with a support project for mothers who had lost children to flawed systems, illegal adoptions, unfair custody battles, or court mistakes. Every day she met women who felt invisible, just like she once had. And every day she told them, "Don't give up. Your truth matters. You still matter." Clara and Leo would eat dinner together every night, usually something easy like pasta or soup. They had a rule: no phones at the table, just talking. Leo liked to tell stories from school, and Clara always listened like it was the most important news in the world. They had a fridge covered in magnets, sticky notes, and little drawings, but two things stood out the most. One was the new birth certificate, the legal paper that now showed Clara as Leo's mother. They had stuck it to the fridge with a red magnet. The second item was a photo of Leo's arm from when he was younger, clearly showing the birthmark they both shared. It had become their symbol, not of pain, but of connection. A reminder of everything they went through to find each other, and everything they would never take for granted again. One afternoon, after doing homework and playing a card game on the floor, Leo stood up and looked at the fridge. He stared at the certificate for a long moment, then turned to Clara and asked a question that caught her off guard. "Do you still love me, even after everything?" His voice was soft, almost shy, as if he was afraid of the answer. Clara stood up and walked over to him. She knelt down to meet his eyes and gently touched his face. "I loved you before I ever met you," she said. "When I thought I lost you, I still loved you. And now that I have you back, I will never let go again. Nothing will ever change that." Leo didn't say anything right away, but he hugged her tightly, the kind of hug that says more than words. Clara held him just as tightly, closing her eyes for a moment. Their life wasn't perfect. They didn't have a big house or a fancy car. Some days were harder than others. There were moments when old feelings came back, doubts, fear, memories of the courtroom. But Clara and Leo talked about everything. They learned how to face things together. When Leo had nightmares, Clara would sit with him until he felt safe. When Clara felt overwhelmed, Leo would draw her a picture or bring her a flower from the park. They were healing together, piece by piece. And the bond they had was stronger than anything either of them had ever known. Clara no longer had to wonder if she was enough. And Leo no longer had to question where he came from. They had found those answers, and now they could focus on what came next, a future they were building on their own terms, with love, truth, and the comfort of never being apart again. As the sun set that evening, Clara made hot chocolate while Leo read a comic book on the couch. The apartment was quiet, warm, and peaceful. She placed 2 mugs on the table, and they sat down together, laughing at one of Leo's silly impressions. Before bedtime, they both stood by the fridge, as they always did. It had become their little nightly ritual. Clara straightened the birth certificate, and Leo touched the photo of the birthmark. It was their way of remembering, not the pain, but the victory, the survival, the family they had become. Clara didn't need a court to tell her she was Leo's mother anymore. She knew it in every hug, every word, every moment they shared. As she turned off the lights and led Leo to bed, she looked back at the fridge one more time and smiled. They had been broken once, but now they had a real beginning, a new, true start. Finally, we've reached the end of this story. I'm extremely happy that you've made it this far. Thank you very much for watching. Comment below what you thought and what was the best or worst part. Don't forget to subscribe. Until next time.